Water is really interesting for health because it both protects health and it transmits disease. So having safe water at home can prevent a lot of diseases. Hygiene helps us stay clean, helps prevent disease transmission. But if that water's contaminated, it can transmit many different kinds of disease. The traditional diseases we think about are things like typhoid and cholera, the diseases that were terrible across Europe in the 19th century and we still see in the developing world today. But in modern water systems, we also see risks from diseases like Legionella, things that actually grow in the water. And water can carry toxic chemicals to us if we don't deal with it safely. The World Health Organization set, from the 1960s, it set international standards and then guidelines for drinking water quality or drinking water safety. And if you look at the history of those guidelines, they tell us something about the history of different approaches to making sure that water's safe. So in the early years, much of the emphasis was on taking samples of water, testing the water, comparing the results to lists of standards and determining if water was safe or not in that way. And we still do that today. It's the underlying approach we use for most chemicals in drinking water. But we saw, starting in the 1990s, a shift in approach. A shift that said we have to give more attention to preventing contamination instead of detecting contamination. And more attention to making sure that the processes that deliver water are safe and reliable 24/7, 365 days a year. And that is the approach that we see now taking off in countries worldwide today. WHO's approach to preventive management, making sure that water is continuously, reliably safe, was described as water safety plans. And a water safety plan, as WHO describes it, has really got three simple underlying questions. The first is what are the hazards that might get into the water? What are the things that might make it unsafe? They can be chemicals, they can be sewage, they could be animal waste. Second question, how can we make that water safe? So what are the things that can be done? They can be things done in catchments to prevent contamination occurring. It can be treatment to remove contaminants. And it can be careful management of the distribution system so the water doesn't get recontaminated. And then the third question is, how do we know that it's safe? So what are the things we're going to measure to make sure that it really is 24/7, 365 safe? And a lot of that monitoring is not on the water quality. A lot of it also concerns the processes to make sure that they are working all the time. And that's what makes it a preventive approach. Now put that together, water safety plans, that's the approach that WHO pushes forward. It's got a process behind it, things that people have to do, but it boils down to those three simple questions. Water safety plans came from a lot of experience, a lot of successful experience, but they also came from looking at where does failure happen? When we saw outbreaks of disease, what could have stopped that happening? That was the way that it was developed. So because it puts the attention not on whether the water has a safe concentration in it, but whether the safe procedures are in place, it means that the water that you receive every day is known. Because the way that we take samples and process them means that by the time we have an analytical result, the laboratory tells us about the water, it's already gone down the pipes, been delivered to households. You've probably boiled your pasta in it. Yeah? So by putting the emphasis on prevention at a much earlier stage, it removes that reliance on the laboratory. Second, we know that treatment processes are not perfect. However carefully they are engineered, however well they are worked, there will be occasional failures. Relying on treatment to detect them is very weak because we can only sample a tiny fraction of all of the water. So we could miss an important event. But if we focus on the processes and know that they're working continuously, we can have much more confidence. The third reason is because the things that we look for when we test water routinely don't capture all of the potential risks. And we know that from outbreaks, where even large outbreaks of disease, when the water was tested, it looked safe using the measures we normally use. So shifting this focus, so not only do we look at the quality of the water itself, but the quality of the system that delivers it to us is a way of having far greater confidence in the water we consume. Yes, there is an obligation. I think anyone that delivers a service to a population owes it to that population to communicate something about the service they deliver, to be honest about successes and failures, and to communicate those facts in accessible, understandable form. And to be honest, I think most places, certainly in high-income countries, that happens, that's normal. I think that good communication about water is much more than that. We also see a role that many utilities happily play, which is educating the public. And that education often takes the form of things like school visits, welcoming, outreach, and so on. Not just to say this is the water that you receive, but to actually welcome people in to understand the system that supports them. And I think that's very important because I don't believe that the water we receive in our taps is a product like a motor car or a lettuce. It's a service, and a service is something which we all benefit from. And I'm interested in the reliability and the safety of the service, which is not quite the same as just how many lettuces can I buy. And I say all of that because I think there's a role for the public in a service which is more than just being consumers. Water relies on the environment that we're all part of and that is around all of us. And I think many of the best utilities understand that by engaging with the public as active actors, it's the public that partially preserves that environment, that enables us all to have safe water. We're all actors in this. And having an educated, informed public that knows its role in environmental protection is one component of delivering safe drinking water. So we live in a very interesting time for humankind. Very early on, if we look at the way people used water systems in old history, in essence the attitude was that water was a pristine source. We took it out of the ground from wells or from springs and we used it and discarded the remainder. Over time, as the population on our planet has become more crowded and more dense, we've not really openly talked about the fact that many of our river systems are just repeated reuse systems. So a river will be extracted, the water will be used, the water will be put back, and then again it will be extracted and reused and put back time and time and time again. So rivers aren't pristine water sources, they are repeated reuse systems. So when you talk about regenerated water, I think we need to understand whether we're talking about a single pass reuse. Now, a single pass reuse would be something like a city which has got a good water source but a small volume that it wishes to capture the wastewater and regenerate and turn it into fresh water. Or whether whether we are looking at the situation of this repeated reuse and reuse and reuse and reuse. I differentiate those things because the chemicals of concern will be slightly different in each of those. But in both cases, it's very clear that there will be some chemicals. It will tend to be things which are resilient in the environment, so they don't biodegrade easily, which tend to accumulate, and which are challenging to the treatment system being used. Those will be the few chemicals that we need to be of concern about. Now, clearly there are microbial hazards as well, but I think the challenge in regenerated water will be a limited number of chemicals, and it will be location specific. Now, your question was, do water safety plans have a role? Certainly, I think the treatment and distribution part of water safety plans will be just the same as they would in any other system. I don't see fundamental differences. But the catchment up to the treatment, I think there will be differences. And the differences will be for those chemicals, where we look and we understand what are the challenges to treatment systems, and then looking up in the system, where do those specific chemicals come from? And can we manage those in the catchment so they don't reach concentrations which are difficult for the system we have? And that will vary from one place to another.